For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. Today I'm continuing on with my different sectors of society type series, and we're, so this is awkward because we've got to talk about religion. It's fictional religion, so it's okay, right? So there are quite a few different religions, and they play very different roles in different nations, and some of them are much more prominent than others. And I've been doing lore deep dives lately into the Imperial era and how much religion impacted that, which is kind of what brings me to this episode. There are 5 religions that I'm aware of. So there's the Lyeran Church, there's Canaan myth, there's Malasan myth, there's Imperial Spiritualism, and Self-Yordivan Theocracy. And Imperial Spiritualism is definitely the one that is least well known about. Self-Yordivan Theocracy is, as the name might imply, pretty exclusive to Self-Yordivic. The Lyeran Church is what most people refer to as just the church. It's the one that's by far the most universal. It's really kind of the only universal religion, and that's still debatable, although I'll get into that later. So, seeing as I touched on the Imperial era a bit earlier, let's talk about the Imperial era and what religion meant back then a little bit. So the Imperial era is where Imperial Spiritualism was, the big thing. It's what some in Hukai refer to as the old ways today. And, with the end of the Imperial era really came the end of Imperial Spiritualism. A lot of people felt that they had been somewhat abandoned or betrayed by aspects of their own beliefs, because it has some loose rules, but a lot of it's quite individualistic. I'll get into details on that later. But a lot of people, because the downfall did also involve a massive genocide of the Hukies, a lot of that knowledge, a lot of that belief system was kind of lost because of that, and it's one of the things that Emperor Taro didn't really prioritize in the Great Burning, because I think as much as anything it didn't occur to him. I think he just assumed that, well, this is our culture, this is our wisdom that's been passed down really forever, so that will never stop. But on that one he was actually wrong. And people say the Imperial era was very oppressive of religion, particularly the Lyeran Church. That's very much what the Lyeran Church claim, just that the Hukies had their way of believing, and they weren't really that interested in the Lyeran Church's beliefs. Things didn't align very well. A lot of the Lyeran Church people do will go out and convert you sort, so there was some tension there. And there were sects of Huki society back then that were quite oppressive. It's like, no, this is our way of doing things. If you're here, you have to accept that. Not necessarily you have to believe in it, but can we not please? It was kind of a bit of the we don't talk about religion thing. We all have our beliefs, but we kind of keep it to ourselves. It's our own business, and I guess that just didn't really go down very well. And, the rise of atheism has been more of a thing in some nations than others. So the downfall was a huge part of that for Hyukai, that they didn't want to hold on to their beliefs for certain people, or they thought it was dangerous to practice those beliefs for in case the hunters were around. Maybe things fell by the wayside. In Malasal, I think the Lyeran church as well, because a lot of the downfall was religious crusading. There was quite a lot of that, and that turned a lot of followers off. It was like, hang on, like this isn't me. This isn't something I want to be part of. So fuck that. A lot of people backed away from religion because of that. It's created deep wounds that last to this day. In Malasal, the Lyeran church was quite prominent for quite a while, but this changed. It was one particular king who was a staunchly religious man, and so was his wife. And when they were trying for an heir, that all seemed to be going swimmingly. But towards the late stages, the queen was quite unwell, and no one was really sure why. She ended up giving birth early and ended up giving birth to twins, and no one had realised that she was carrying twins. And while she survived, one of the twins didn't. And this changed a lot of people's beliefs, because it's okay, but how can the goddess of life, Uniba, how can she justify this? How can she justify, this newborn baby, just dying within 24 hours of it being born, and the other one was not very well for quite a long time. So that turned a lot of Malsans off, as well as the king and queen themselves. They grew, partly because of that and their lack of acceptance of those events, they grew to be quite cruel. And they were controversial figures before that, even at best, so they became a symbol of that religion. And that symbol is, to this day, associated with cruelty and with oppression, and people are like, well, okay, well, that's not the point of Malasar, that's not what we want, why would we want that? So basically fuck the church at that point. Keeping on the line of fuck the church, let's talk about the status of practitioners in different nations, because this varies wildly. So in Malasal, they're not on the board I've got here, but in Malasal, if you're still preaching for the Lyeran church, I mean, you're basically just kind of a laughing stock. It's just like, dude, read the fucking room, get out of here. And that's not that dissimilar in Hyukai either. A lot of that is, guys, this was pushed on us during the partition as, like, to try and stop us being, more genocided, and that's literally it. Like, nobody actually wanted this, no one asked for this, and, we were encouraged to, like, just not, so how about you just don't do that? It's been a while since then. If we just quietly stop doing things, that'd be great. So within the religious sects of Hyukai, of which there aren't very many, preachers are obviously important, but to everybody else it's just like, dude, put a sock in it already. Just like, again, just read the fucking room. In Lyera, this is kind of the opposite. I mean, it's their church, their whole monarchy, that whole system comes from religion. It's all very much about, the people who were chosen, and then that's transformed into lineage, and it's tenuous, honestly, from the outside, and kind of tenuous from the inside, but, like, in the era, if you're not religious, if you don't follow their church, that is a problem. There is active religious oppression in the era, which is honestly kind of ironic, given that's one of the things that they had a problem with in the downfall, but I digress. So yeah, preachers and practitioners of religion in the era are important, they're a big deal, they're some of the most influential people in Lyera. And this is the same in South Fjordavik. Again, South Fjordavan theocracy it's how their whole nation is run. It's all about that, and I'll get into the exact detail of this later. South Fjordavan theocracy, basically their top religious people are the ruling council, is the short answer. So they are, orders of magnitude above everybody else. And it's not really required that anybody else believe in the religion. It's just like, well, it doesn't really matter what you think because this is the council. That's their job. You're just whoever, you do what you're told, basically. And it's one of the reasons that both Lyera and South Fjordavik are kind of hated, because people don't like this religion-first approach, partly because of, the whole genocide thing, and especially with everything that happened in Malasar as well, people are like, guys, what you doing? Read the room. Are you not seeing patterns and shit here? How about you just, don't do that? And the religious oppression in Lyera, it's not a secret, really. They try and keep it quiet, and it's by no means as loud as it should be, don't get me wrong, but it's somewhat common knowledge at this point that it's like, yeah, if you don't believe in the church in Lyera, you just kind of can't live there. And whether that varies from, I think the common belief really is just, well, you'll just get completely shunned. Just it's just not tolerable living there. You aren't welcome anywhere. People might not even let you shop in certain shops, so you just can't live there if you're not that way. But there are other people, and people who travel around, so sort of more nomadic people, the mercenaries, they know more about that, and they do try and get the word out how and when they can, but so yeah, it's not going to make you popular on the international stage, let's put it that way. So the Lyeran Church, let's talk about the specifics of that. The Lyeran Church has a pantheon of different gods. So one of the biggest names that you'll find in the Lyeran Church is Uniba. She is the goddess of life. One of the other big names you get is Iba, who is the goddess of love. Zhangba is quite a big one as well, who is the god of luck. But there are numerous others as well, so there's Akuba, god of death, Shinba, god of health, Yuchenba, god of justice, Hiroba, god of prosperity, Yiba, goddess of consistency, because for some reason that's the thing, Jiralba, I believe that's how that's, I've got no idea, goddess of hope, there's Jingba, goddess of nature, Lianba, goddess of water, Yayanba, I think, goddess of fire, Yangba, god of the sun, yes, those two are annoyingly similar, and Wanjuba, goddess of night. And if I have mispronounced any of this, I'm trying, guys, I don't know. And some people put great emphasis on some than others, but Uniba, the goddess of life, is kind of the big one. And there are different national holidays for each god, so Iba's birthday is the sort of Valentine's Day equivalent for the Lyeran Church, and there are equivalent sort of events for all of them. And the reason that Uniba really is such a big name is because of the Lyeran Church's beliefs around reincarnation. And they're not the only religion that believe in reincarnation, for what it's worth. But the way they believe in it is that effectively this is Uniba's domain. This is one of the things that she does. If she chooses who doesn't reincarnate, it's not a certainty for the Lyeran Church. A lot of that, it varies depending on exactly who's preaching and exact beliefs. Some people believe this is about lifestyle, or whether it's just that you believe, or what happens to a soul if it's not reincarnated. There's not really much said about that, because I'm sure people have tried to figure that out, but the Lyeran monarchs don't want people talking about that, because the current King Rome doesn't want people to talk about that, because he thinks having no certainty around that is more frightening. First King Rome came to the conclusion, one way or another, I don't know exactly how this happened, that, in order for prosperity for everybody, that, it was necessary for them to create their own space, to take over their own land. And you know what happens when people get too much power? Power corrupts, it goes to their heads, and all that. It all got very much out of hand. And the leader of the Malasounds at the time was sort of on board with a lot of that, on board with, okay, but clearly, like, society isn't working as it is, we all need our own space, but he didn't like that it was done in the name of the gods. Particularly, it was just like, well, I think he himself was an atheist, because it was, okay, but if there really is such a thing as a god of justice and a god of prosperity, wouldn't, like, this has been going on for long enough, when they have, like, pulled their finger out and done something by now. It went along with that in the downfall, because the Lyerans, they were numerous, they were a powerful ally, but that ended up spreading religion in Melisau until things happened later down the line that I already touched on, but he was never a fan of it. So Melisau myth takes a very different role as a religion, because it's not so much a religion so much as a set of fables and folklore that nobody's ever really taken all that seriously. A lot of it has been about, learning through fables. I saw Aesop's fables. It's, I guess, probably the closest equivalent that I know, is a lot of teaching of wisdom through fables and things like that. And there are a lot of inconsistencies with Melisau myth as well, because with the deities and with the tales, one thing that's always been very true of Melisau myth is that locations where myths take place are places that you can find a lot of the time. They like to tie it to the real world that they live in for, real world learning and all that. But there are some tales that have changed location or have adapted location, or there are quite a lot of inconsistencies with things like that. And the Malasounds have always adapted the myths to their current culture and to the times. And lately what that's meant is the birth of fantasy, and fantasy books, fantasy short stories and all of that. A lot of people are taking these old views of things and thinking, okay, but what if things were slightly different? So sort of mythology retellings, and that's then blossomed into something more than that, or people talking about shifters or things like that. And that's all come from Melisau and Melisau myth. And a lot of people on the continent find a lot of this fascinating, because it is so different to other religions that, it's not taken seriously. It's just like, hey, here are these stories we have, and it all ties to, the animals of our land. Their sort of semi-deities are all different animals, but what we have, and there are main ones of this too, so there's the panther, teacher of honesty, there's camel, teacher of travel, hyena, teacher of strategy, viper, teacher of determination, spider, harbinger of death, and that's one of the big ones, as well as panther. For what it's worth, panther's a big one. Hawk is the harbinger of protection, fox is harbinger of joy, that's another big one. Cobra is harbinger of grace, scorpion is paragon of survival, vulture is paragon of opportunism, mouse is paragon of hope, owl is paragon of integrity, crocodile is protector of water, and jackal is protector of food. So there are quite a lot of them. And all of these and their roles sort of play into effectively sort of Melisau slang, and how people just talk about things on the everyday. So they might say, oh, you're a bit of a fox, or this or that, and that doesn't mean what we would mean by that. It can do, but it can also just mean, you make me happy, you're a joyful person. And spider is definitely one of the big ones that people talk about because, death is a big thing. There's been war, there's been strife, and Malsa's had 2 civil wars since the downfall, so they know their fair share of strife. And to this day, don't kill spiders in Malsa. Don't do that. It doesn't go down well. Like, just leave them alone, or like move them outside, but don't kill them. Don't do that. Malsa myth also has beliefs around death. I mean, they have a deity of death in the spider, the harbinger of death, and this isn't like if you see a spider, like you're gonna die. That's not how it's that's not what it means. What it means is more the whole idea is the spiders and the owls work together. And the owl is the paragon of integrity, and the whole idea is that if you are a person with good integrity, you stick to your principles and all that, that's good. And if you're not that person, if you don't have good integrity, the whole idea is that owls will come while you sleep and steal bits of your soul. And then when you die, this impacts the spider's task. Because the spiders are said to spin webs that carry you, and they carry you on these webs to bring you to the soul's final resting place, to let the soul rest. And if there's not enough soul for them to carry, well, you fall. And also the spiders, if you are a good soul, a worthy person, it's said that the spider's webs are spun of gold. They spin webs of potentially different materials, different thicknesses, different strengths, depending on how you've lived your life, whether you're a good person or not. And these, if they're too fragile, they can break, and again, you can fall. Quite what this means? Well, again, nobody seems to want to answer that question. So let's talk about a different type of mythology. Let's talk about Canaan myth. And Canaan myth is, again, relatively simple. They are the protectors of the different islands of Canaan, because Canaan is a little archipelago. So each island in the archipelago has its own protector, it has its own deity, and these deities are merfolk. And the islands are named after these merfolk protectors, and the tea that comes on the island, I talked about this in the tea episode, the tea is named for the island, but the island is named for the deity, so there's a lot of depth to that. There are depictions of these merfolk deities around, kind of everywhere. It's a big thing. And again, it's not necessarily taken all that seriously, outside of, the fisher folk, who do sort of routinely be like, hey, kind fish, letting you know, don't sink my boat, please, I'd appreciate that. But the everyday folk of Cana, they don't think about it all that much. They're there to protect the land, and Cana is a very prosperous little nation, so they're good. This comes up in Miss Nakagami because Haru's the walking encyclopedia that he is, but also, Ai Nagashima does not like merfolk. I haven't been able to tap into why, but he finds them very creepy. He does not like them, which is a little bit awkward when you're in Cana. So him and Haru have a bit of a conversation about it, and he's not very happy about it. So Fjordan theocracy is another one that's changed quite a lot throughout different eras. It is the basis for their government, it is how they do things. The ruling council are said to be relatives of their deities, and then supposedly can communicate with these deities, sort of have visions or signs or prophetic dreams and shit, like from the deities. That's kind of how all that's supposed to work. And this is what makes them leaders, that they have this wisdom and foresight that other people don't have. And the Jarls all have their own different personalities and their own different ways of being communicated, and there's this communicated with, and there's a whole thing about pilgrimages and trying to have enough space alone with these people to talk with them. And sometimes they need to be searched out, or they say, oh yeah, I'm in this place, come and find me, and all of this. And the Jarls are effectively wandering spirits. They are the founders of South Fjordvik. There's Stefan, there's Olvir, there's Viljar, Frederick, Ketil, and Ulrich. And they are these wandering spirits. South Fjordvik theocracy doesn't really have any beliefs around reincarnation. That's not a thing. It's a kind of very atheist approach that, well, live once, that's kind of it, unless you are, a Jarl, in which case you wander. And the Jarls they have now are not the same as the Jarls they have had previously. Because the South Fjordvans, these are the six Jarls they have now are the 6 founders of modern South Fjordvik. They're cursed by this. They're cursed to never rest. The South Fjordovan leadership do, to an extent, see themselves as the cursed nation because of this, that they've had to rebuild from the ground up, and to an extent they've had to reinvent a key part of their religion in the Jarls in order to have a functioning society and nation and survive. Imperial spiritualism is very different to a lot of other religions because it is such an inherently individualistic thing. They don't really have deities or anything like that. They don't have really any kind of religious text. It's all very much your own path, your own way of looking at things with some common elements. The closest they really get to, a lot of it is based in nature, and it's just beliefs around nature, and there's not really any infrastructure around spiritualism. There aren't really churches or shrines or anything like that. It's all about really respect to nature, and they very much believed in reincarnation, but they took a very different approach to reincarnation. You don't have to earn it, there's no deity controlling that. In Huki spiritualism, that's just a process of nature. It just happens. And it's a little bit different to other reincarnation as well, because it's not just, okay, you're now reincarnated, enjoy. It's that there's a cycle to it. You live a human life, and then you're reincarnated as an animal of some kind. And then, once that animal dies, that's reincarnated as a human again. And there's not really any limit to what animal that can be. That can be a rabbit, that can be a panther, that can be a whale. It can be really anything, a butterfly, potentially. And that's just accepted as something that happens. And it's one of the main reasons that pet ownership is not a thing, because you don't know who that once was. And that's still a thing across the entire continent now. Because pets were, for the entirety of the Imperial era, really, it just wasn't a thing. It's, much as anything, kind of not really occurred to people besides, okay, a cat has just decided it lives here, I guess I just deal with that, which is fine in Imperial spiritualism. If a cat just decides it lives in your house, it lives in your house, you kind of have a duty to that cat at that point, because clearly it means something. whilst our myth when it comes to pet ownership is it's just kind of it's kind of slightly uncomfortable because it's like they're not deities exactly, but it's like there's it's slightly uncomfortable with the whole idea of keeping animals in captivity when they're these big teachers. It's like that's kind of weird. Let's just not do that. But with imperial spiritualism, if an animal chooses you, that's fine. That's an animal that clearly that's someone who means something. You mean something to them. So you have a duty to look after them after that point. And there are people who take that very seriously. So there's an old soldier who happens across a bird of prey when it's injured, and he decides, okay, well, I'll nurse this big bird back to health because that just seems like the right thing to do, and then I'll let it go, and the bird's like, no, I live here now. You seem nice, I stay. So that bird to him is like, well, okay, this is someone that means something to me. And in imperial spiritualism, should someone important to you die, and this is very much imperial era, you were within your rights to see if you could find them. You were absolutely within your rights to see if you could find who they'd become after that moment, animal or human alike, really. And how they handle, how people remember previous lives and things like that. Again, this is very individualistic because, how long people's lives might be or how good people's memories are, or all sorts of things. It's very hard to make hard and fast rules around that. There really wasn't much more to it than stuff like respecting nature and reincarnation. There isn't. It was very simple. It's a very simple religion. It is lost to time, a lot of it, and the whole idea of finding someone that has been reincarnated, that's completely lost to time, really, and that's not something that anybody would really do anymore, with very few exceptions. But given all these different religions in a small space, and the diversity of how it's viewed, education gets kind of thorny. It's incredibly varied in different regions, and when it comes to education, churches like to get loud about this, and particularly the Lyeran church. This is a thing in Hukai in particular. They seem like they're a lot bigger than they are a lot of the time when it comes to certain issues, just because they shout very, very loudly. So people think it's more of a problem than it is, basically, and they get pandered to because of it. But a lot of the education is just about, basic understanding of other people's beliefs. Like, hey, if you go to Marzal, don't kill spiders. It's a bad idea. Just, don't do that. And it's probably best to just, not talk about certain things in front of, certain people with certain beliefs, or, just handle these subjects with care. It's not, in most nations, it's not taken massively seriously. The one that doesn't really take any stance in education is imperial spiritualism, because it is so lost that, honestly, the majority of people, even within Hukai, are just, not really aware of very much of it anymore. They might know the odd thing about the old ways, but certainly not, everything about reincarnation. That's lost. I always like to touch on notable practitioners in these episodes. So, the most notable practitioner is Helga. She is on the leading council of South Fjordavik. She is related to one of the Jarls. That is that whole deal. She herself struggles a bit with religion, so it's really awkward, and that is something that comes up a lot on page. But that's her status within that, is that she is effectively this religious leader, even though she kind of doesn't believe it. Ai Nagashima is ex-Lyeran church. He was brought up in a religious family, so for the longest time it was just, you go to church, deal with it. And I wouldn't say that he ever really believed in any of it. It was more just that he was very ambivalent to it for a long time. And then the war happened, and then he's like, yeah, no, this is bullshit. The emirs, the Malasal monarchs, are again notable practitioners of the Lyeran church, at least up until a point. I did touch on that earlier, but they're worth a mention again here. I think that about wraps up this episode. And there are a couple of other episodes in this series that were uploaded recently. If you want to check those out, they're very easy to find. One of these days I'll put things in playlists when I figure out how to title them, but it will not be this day. If you are looking for me elsewhere, if you're looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you are here, that is Instagram. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. You'll get soundbite teaser reels, advance notice of what the episode for the week is, so you can see if it's part of this series or not. All of that sort of stuff and more, as and when I experiment with it. That's Instagram, that's Jade_Black21. If you're looking for semi-live updates on my writing and how all of this stuff features on page, little excerpts and snippets about things, that's Twitter. I'm JadeBlack21 on there. And if you really like all this world building and you want to see some art and things relating to that, hit up my Pinterest. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. And if you are published or on the way, please do get in touch. If you can email me, I'm jade42black@gmail.com. Indie and self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from. A couple of things to note: it doesn't have to be a new release, it also doesn't have to be out yet, there's no genre restriction, there's no age category restriction, there's no novel length restriction either. It doesn't have to be a novel. Novellas are welcome, short story collections, overview of a trilogy, whatever you want to do, whatever you got, bring it in, let's see what we can do. Make sure you read the information in the description first, include that in your initial email. That'll make it a lot easier for me to sort everything out without having a whole lot of back and forth and or giving automatic notes if and when I get inundated. That's shit for everybody, so let's not do that. And until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright J Black 2024.